The 2024 presidential election cycle is set up to become the longest in modern American history. Presumptive nominees Joe Biden and Donald Trump are already treating each other like general election opponents, and for good reason. Both have won each of the primary contests held so far and hold huge national leads over their challengers in polling averages. Barring some unexpected development, Biden and Trump will face off in a historic 7th presidential election rematch. For those of you who have been following my channel since the 2020 election, you would know that I tend to base all of my analyses strictly on the data, using polls, voting patterns, prediction markets, and demographics, among other non-opinion-based factors, to drive my predictions. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to fill out this 2024 presidential election map according to my own personal prediction for how the race to 270 electoral votes will shape up in November. Of course, my own predictions are still founded on data and trends. I'm not going to just randomly make California red or South Dakota blue. It being my own predictions, though, means that it may not perfectly reflect what the polls are saying right now. That's because polls are very likely to change over the coming 9 months before Election Day, and the purpose of this prediction is to forecast how I think the election will result at the end of all those shifts. Let's start by filling in all of the safe states for Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee who is actually less likely to secure his party's nomination than Donald Trump is at this point, according to prediction markets. Predictit and Polymarket both give him about a 70 to 75% chance of being the Democratic nominee. Much of that uncertainty is probably related to his age. Trump, meanwhile, has a better than 90% chance in both markets. Starting in the Northeast, we have the Empire State, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Maine's more urban and strongly Democratic-leaning 1st Congressional District. And then down the Atlantic coast, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Washington, D.C. These states, plus the District of Columbia, are all projected to vote for Biden by more than 12 percentage points. He won them all by at least 15% in 2020, the highest being Vermont at D plus 35, and the lowest New Jersey at D plus 16. Jersey is likely to finish closest to likely territory in my mind. Once again, it shifted half a point in favor of Republicans relative to the nation between 2016 and 2020, and has shifted more than 2 points in favor of the GOP since 2012. In a Republican wave year, I could see it dipping closer and closer to single digits. But as of right now, I'm not expecting that large of a national shift to happen. Moving on from the Northeast, the states of Illinois and Colorado, the two lone non-coastal solid blue states, will likely back Biden by more than 12 points again in 2024. A battleground as recently as 2016, Colorado saw the second largest pro-Biden swing of any state in 2020. Out west, the Pacific Coast strongholds of Washington, Oregon, California, and Hawaii will back Democrats once again in 2024, just as they have in every election since 1988. The margins here ranged from D plus 16 in Oregon, all the way up to D plus 29 in both California and Hawaii. Oregon, like New Jersey, is a state that I could see being decided by a margin closer to likely territory in a strong year for Republicans. Again, the cutoff is 12 points for a safe state, but after Trump came within just 11 points in 2016, it trended firmly back into solid territory for Biden in 2020. So these 15 states, plus Washington, D.C., combine for 191 electoral votes for Joe Biden. California, Illinois, and New York combine for 101 votes alone. These key Democratic strongholds help provide the Democratic Party with a very solid foundation in any given presidential year. Now, as for the safe Trump states, in the Mountain West, we have Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah. Trump won each of these 4 states by more than 16 points in 2020, ranging from R plus 16 in Montana to R plus 43 in Wyoming. They have all voted for the Republican presidential candidate in each of the last 7 elections. Moving down the Great Plains states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska's statewide election and its 1st and 3rd congressional districts. We'll get to the more competitive 2nd district later. Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. The last time any of these 6 Middle America states voted for a Democrat was for Lyndon B. Johnson in 1964, when he almost won 500 electoral votes in a landslide victory. Nebraska and Kansas have shifted notably more than 5 percentage points in favor of Democrats in 2020 compared to 2016, the largest pro-Biden swings among states that Trump won in 2020. But even if they do shift in favor of Dems again in 2024, it's not likely to be enough to move them out of solid territory, as they still backed Trump by 19 and 16 points 4 years ago. In the South, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina. These states have favored Republicans by at least 10 points in 4 straight elections, and have not gone Democratic since 1996 for Bill Clinton, a Southern Democrat himself who previously served as governor of Arkansas. South Carolina's 2020 margin was actually in likely Republican territory, as Trump won the Palmetto State by just under 12 points, 11.7% to be exact. But in what should be a more favorable environment for Trump in 2024, I do fully expect it to be decided by more than 12% this time around. Finally, in the Appalachian and Midwest regions, we have Kentucky, Indiana, and West Virginia, which backed Trump by 26, 16, and 39 points in 2020. Now, even though Trump has won more states than Biden so far, 18 to 15, his electoral vote total is much lower at 122. That's just the nature of the Democratic and Republican parties' electoral distribution. Democrats run up big margins in deep blue coastal states with large population centers, while Republicans' voter bases are more spread out across the middle of the country in states with significantly lower populations, and therefore less electoral votes. All things considered, though, Biden does start out with a stronger foundation than Trump, but in terms of true baseline electoral vote totals, I tend to include the likely states as well, which are those projected to go to a particular candidate by a margin between 7 to 12 points. In other words, you can think of these states as having a better than 90% chance of voting for Trump or Biden, and they would only become competitive in a landslide race. Starting with Trump, Maine's 2nd congressional district will fall in likely Republican territory, after backing Trump by likely margins in 2016 and 2020 as well. This is the most rural congressional district in the entire country, and the largest by area west of the Mississippi River. If I had to put a number on it, I would project a Trump plus 9 victory here in 2024. Moving over to the Midwest, Iowa and Ohio are likely Republican. No surprise here, I do expect them to be closer to the higher end of this category as well than the lower end in 2024, after having backed Trump by more than 8% in both 2016 and 2020. Expect the margin in Iowa to be slightly more pro-Trump than in Ohio when all of the votes are counted. My best guess right now is Trump wins Iowa by 10 to 11 points and Ohio by 9 to 10 points. Moving right along down to the southeast in Florida, where all of the momentum is with the GOP. Trump won the state by a 3.4-point margin in 2020, the largest margin of victory for any presidential candidate in Florida since 2004. And it was one of just 8 states where Trump actually performed better than he did in 2016. More recently, in the 2022 midterms, Republican incumbents Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio won re-election by landslide margins, by Florida standards at least, 19% and 16%. So while Florida had previously commanded more Democratic attention than perhaps any other state, at least in 21st century electoral politics, that simply won't be the case in 2024. Trump currently leads Biden by 9% in DDHQ's polling average, and while I did say that that's not the basis for my predictions in these videos, Florida is clearly on a slippery slope towards becoming a solidly Republican state in future elections. My lowest estimate would probably pin Trump's margin at 7.5, but I think the range of outcomes here is pretty wide, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he ends up winning by 9 or even 10 points when all is said and done. Finally, moving out of the continental US, the state of Alaska will almost certainly vote Republican in 2024. It's only gone blue once in its entire history as a state, for LBJ in 1964. Though it is worth noting that state Democrats have ran several successful statewide elections over the last 2 decades, most recently Mary Peltola's U.S. House victory in 2022. Trump's 10-point margin of victory in 2020 was also Republicans' narrowest presidential victory here since 1968. It trended 3.5 points towards Democrats relative to the nation since 2012, and its demographic profile is closer to that of a swing state than of a strong Republican state, as it's quite diverse and ranks in the middle of the pack in proportion of college-educated residents. It is generally very difficult to predict elections in Alaska, but the margin here will probably end up right around the 10 to 12 point range this November. For Joe Biden now, his likely list starts with New Mexico, as it backed Biden by 11 points in 2020, after having voted for Clinton by just 8 in 2016. New Mexico was a swing state not too long ago, having voted for Republican George Bush in 2004 and backing Democrat Al Gore by less than 0.1% in 2000. It ranks as the 12th least educated state in the country, the lowest of any Biden state besides battleground Nevada, and is also the 15th most rural, which ranks right behind only Vermont and Maine among the least urban Democratic states. New Mexico's trend has been pretty flat, though, since 2004. Democratic presidential candidates have won it 4 straight times, and the results have consistently remained 6 to 8 points to the left of wherever the nation was in that year. That said, it is the only majority Hispanic state in the US, and if Republicans keep making inroads with Hispanic voters, that could potentially make up some of their deficit, at least enough for me to project that it will remain in the likely D territory, around a D+8 to D+10 margin. The next state I am confident will go likely Democrat in 2024 is Virginia, which went from D+5 in 2016 to D+10 in 2020, the 15th strongest pro-Biden swing of any state in the country, and outside of Glenn Youngkin's narrow off-year governor election victory in 2021, Republicans have not won a major statewide election in the Commonwealth since 2009. It's also worth noting that the environment for Youngkin's victory in 2021 was as sour on Democrats as it ever has been, and realistically, the Biden campaign won't have to spend that much time in Virginia to win it by a comfortable margin, probably around at least 8 points. They have bigger fish to fry. Finally, Maine's statewide contest is the last one to receive a likely Democrat rating. It backed Democrats in 8 straight presidential elections, and like Virginia, it's shifted strongly towards Democrats in 2020, the 4th most of any state actually, going from Clinton +3 to Biden +9. As you can see here as well, Maine is a tale of 2 districts. The first is strongly Democratic. It's more urban and similar ideologically to the rest of the Northeast, and it's backed Democratic presidential candidates by double-digit margins since 1996. The second district, meanwhile, as we discussed prior, is more rural and Republican-leaning. The first district does tend to hold more weight, though, given its margin is more pronounced in favor of Democrats than the second district is for Republicans, which is why Maine statewide tends to lean Democrat. Those likely states bring Biden and Trump up to their absolute lowest projected electoral outcomes, 211 for the incumbent president and 179 for the former president. I would say that there is better than 90% chance that both candidates secure at least this many electoral votes this November, and so it becomes a matter of who can secure the right combination out of the 10 states remaining, which combine for 148 electoral votes to reach 270. Just 6 out of these 10 states, though, are the ones that I would actually consider to be toss-ups in 2024, with 4 others leaning in one direction. I'll start with Trump. Texas will go down as lean Republican. It has not voted for a Democratic presidential candidate in almost 50 years. And in spite of growing hype that the Democratic Party of today would flip it at some point this decade, Trump still received 52.1% of the vote in the Lone Star State in 2020, almost identical to his 52.2% vote share in 2016. The margin did drop to 5.6% between Trump and Biden in 2020, though, from 9 points between Trump and Clinton in 2016. That 2020 margin is the lowest of the 21st century in Texas, and Biden's 46.5% vote share was the most for a Democrat in Texas since 1976. Still, though, it was a disappointing showing for Democrats, all things considered, as Biden was polling within 1.5 points of Trump in polling averages, and several forecasters had it rated as a toss-up headed into Election Day. Trump and the Republican Party at large's rapid gains in the Rio Grande Valley is a major concern for the DNC, and has at least temporarily put a halt to the Democrats' momentum in the state. Even as urban voters and suburban areas have moved in large numbers towards Biden, many Hispanic voters in the South abruptly left the Democratic coalition as the Rio Grande Valley shifted more decisively towards Trump than any other region in the country outside of Florida. Democrats had been benefiting from the state's rising population of college graduates, younger voters, and minorities, but Texas is 40% Hispanic, making losses among that demographic group catastrophic. Trump should carry Texas by a margin around 5 to 7 points again in 2024. The other lean Republican state is North Carolina. The Tar Heel state has not voted for a Democratic presidential candidate since 2008, and Republicans have won 5 consecutive Senate races. North Carolina has established itself as a consistently purple state in major statewide races, yet in spite of favorable demographic trends, the Democratic Party has consistently fallen short, even in races where they were polling in front. North Carolina was considered a tilt Democrat state for Clinton in 2016 and Biden in 2020. Both Democrats held narrow leads in the final polling averages, yet Trump pulled out on top both times. Likewise, the 2020 Senate race in North Carolina was also considered lean Democrat, with Cal Cunningham consistently pulling ahead of Republican incumbent Tom Tillis, only to end up losing by 2 points. Now, here in 2024, Trump is leading Biden by an average of 8 points in DDHQ/The Hill's polling average. He's led by at least 5 points in every poll taken since last November. I think we're increasingly likely to see a Trump win in 2024 by a similar margin to 2016, around 3 to 4 points. Maybe he'll even push 5 in a very good year for him. For Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, meanwhile, New Hampshire, which went from D plus 0.3 in 2016 to D plus 7 in 2020, and then Minnesota, which went from D plus 1.5 to D plus 7, will both lean in his direction. Minnesota holds the longest active streak of voting for Democratic presidential candidates at 12 straight elections, while New Hampshire voted Republican most recently in 2000. Consistently the most competitive state in the Northeast, Hillary Clinton came less than half a point from losing New Hampshire in 2016, though Biden managed to bring it firmly back into the Democratic coalition in 2020. It's a similar story in Minnesota, very close in 2016, less so in 2020. I do expect that both states will fall somewhere in between their margins between those two elections, with 7 points being on the upper end of outcomes and more narrow 1 to 2 point victories in the lower end. Right now, given I expect the national environment to be less pro-Biden than in 2024, I would say that both states are hovering right around D plus 5 territory right now. Cool. Now with those 4 out of the way, we can finally dive into the 6 states, plus Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, that will matter more than any other in the race to 270. Currently, Donald Trump leads Joe Biden by 10 electoral votes with 235 to 225. Mathematically speaking, if Trump managed to flip any 4 out of these 6 states, he would be elected president. Remember, Biden won all 6 in 2020, Trump had won them all but Nevada in 2016. You can bet that Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, plus Nebraska's 2nd District, are circled in big red ink at the RNC and DNC headquarters at this very moment. Both sides will surely empty their ginormous fundraising pockets into the ground game and advertisements here. All 6 were decided by less than 3 percentage points in 2020. The margins in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin were each less than 1%. And a total of less than 43,000 votes separated Biden and Trump in these 3 states out of more than 11 million votes cast. Had Trump persuaded those 43,000 voters to back him instead of Biden, he would be serving a 2nd term right now. That's how close the 2020 election was, and 2024 may be even closer. With that said, let's get into my personal predictions for the outcomes in these contests. Remember, while I am keeping polling and other data points in mind, this video is entirely based around my projection for how the election will turn out. It's not dated to if this election were held today, it's how I believe the election held on November 5th, 2024 will turn out. Starting in Nevada, there are numerous positive indicators for the Republican Party, even as Democrats have dominated statewide elections here pretty much since Barack Obama's landslide victory in 2008. Nevada has shifted 5 points in favor of Republicans relative to the nation since 2012, and ranks 44th out of the 50 U.S. states in terms of the proportion of residents with a college degree, the lowest of any Biden-won state. Additionally, the GOP reclaimed the governor's office in 2022 and came within a point of defeating a relatively popular Democratic incumbent senator in those midterms. Moreover, Republicans secured the statewide House popular vote by 4 points in that year, marking the first time in decades. The 2024 polling data also leans in favor of Trump, with the former president leading Biden by 5.6% based on 16 polls in DDHQ/The Hill's polling average. Of course, I don't expect Trump to win the state by such a large margin, as Nevada backed Democrats by 2.5 points in 2016 and 2020, and such a substantial shift would be unheard of in a key swing state during a competitive election. That said, I do believe that 2024 is the year that Nevada finally makes its move towards the GOP at the presidential level. I think Republicans have an opportunity to secure a victory in Nevada by an even larger margin than in many of the states that Biden won by a narrower margin in 2020. That includes Arizona, which I also have tilting towards Trump and Republicans. My bold prediction here, though, is that Arizona votes to the left of Nevada. Arizona has voted for Democrats in 3 straight Senate elections and has shifted nearly 9 points to the left compared to the rest of the nation at the presidential level since 2012. That's the 3rd most of any state in the entire country. Yet that being said, Biden has not led in a single head-to-head poll against Trump here in Arizona since last June. He has consistently looked much weaker actually in early polls across the Sun Belt. On that note, moving across the Sun Belt to Georgia, another state that Biden won by a very narrow margin in 2020, 0.2%, and a raw vote margin of less than 12,000. The Peach State is yet another where Trump is polling very, very well. He leads Biden by 8.3% according to DDHQ/The Hill's polling average, based on 18 polls in the race. Like Arizona, though, Georgia has shifted very hard towards Democrats over the last decade at the presidential level, though it is still a traditionally Republican-leaning state, one in which incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock was recently forced into a runoff in the 2022 midterms against Herschel Walker, objectively one of the weakest Republican candidates for Senate in a very long time. Democrats' breakthrough in 2020 was certainly significant, but the tides right now are very much favoring another Republican flip here, as I have Georgia tilting towards Trump as well. Alrighty, that leaves us with Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District and the Rust Belt trio of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District will tilt Democrat. Biden won it by 6 points in 2020, and while it was redistricted a couple points more Republican following the 2020 census, and a Republican currently represents it in the U.S. House, this urbanized Omaha-based district is very well educated and has shifted 14 points towards Democrats since 2012. While I do certainly expect it to be closer in 2024, Biden should still carry its 1 electoral vote by a couple of points. Around 2% is my best guess right now. 44 electoral votes remain now in these upper 3 Rust Belt states, with 268 electoral votes to his name with victories in Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. Trump can lose 2 of these states and still surpass 270 electoral votes to win the election. For Joe Biden, on the other hand, if all of these Sun Belt states do go Republican, Biden would need to hold all 3 states, traditionally named the Blue Wall, in its entirety. He did flip each of these states in 2020 after Trump swept them in 2016, and that 2016 race was the first time any of these states had voted Republican since 1984. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have also backed the same candidate in 11 consecutive presidential elections, dating back to 1976. Had they voted for Clinton in 2016, she would have defeated Trump, and had they voted for Trump in 2020, he would have defeated Biden. So, with that in mind, I think it's fair to analyze this group as a trio. Demographically speaking, they each rank between 12th to 20th in proportion of white residents, and between 24th through 33rd in college education. Ancestrally Democratic due to a strong presence of white working-class voters, Republicans made significant gains in 2016 due to their growing appeal among white, non-college educated voters. But aversion to Trump among suburban college-educated white women, in particular, proved enough to flip them back to Biden in 2020. Now, in 2024, it's truly anyone's guess as to how they will vote next. On the one hand, widespread backlash against the Supreme Court's decision to strike down Roe v. Wade helped the Democratic Party to exceed expectations in each of these states in the 2022 midterms, as they swept the governor's races and outperformed polling expectations in several key down-ballot races as well. On the other hand, though, despite economic indicators rebounding in recent months, a large majority of voters in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania still hold very negative views of the state of the economy, and history shows that incumbent presidents' re-election odds are heavily tied to how voters feel about their personal financial situations at the time of the election. The economy always tops voters' key issues, especially in this part of the country. So in order for Biden to hold on to these states, he will need voters' economic outlooks to improve dramatically. According to the most recent Gallup poll from the end of January, economic confidence has improved to its highest level in 2 years, yet is still very negative. This uptick has coincided with a slight uptick in Joe Biden's approval rating, which is now at 41%. He had averaged 39% in 2023. Interestingly, though, as I hinted at just now, polling data is more favorable to Biden in these 3 states than the rest of the key battlegrounds across the Sun Belt region. Biden trails by just 3 points in Pennsylvania. He had previously led in 3 of the last 4 polls taken in the Keystone State, though, before this Chisholm Strategies poll came in at Trump plus 8. He also trails Trump by 3.5% in Michigan, and then 1.7% in Wisconsin, according to DDHQ/The Hill's polling averages. Now, personally, I hold a different view on Biden's chances in these 3 states. I believe he is most likely to win in Michigan, given his 3-point victory here in 2020, and the Democrats' consistent strong electoral performances since then. And then Pennsylvania is what I consider to be his next best chance. He won by 1.2% 4 years ago, and it boasts the highest proportion of college-educated voters among these 3 states. I should note, though, that there has been a notable backlash to his handling of the conflict in the Middle East, and Michigan in particular, which might lead the state to vote more conservatively compared to Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, and maybe a reason behind these polling numbers at the moment. In my estimation, though, Wisconsin is the least likely to support Biden. He only carried the state by 0.6% and 20,000 votes in 2020. Moreover, its demographics favor Republicans, as it ranks as the 11th whitest state in the U.S. and 39th in terms of college education. Notably, Wisconsin shifted a full point to the right compared to the national trend between 2016 and 2020. As while Trump won it by 0.7% in 16, Biden's victory margin of 0.6% in 2020 was, despite the nation as a whole, shifting over 2 points to the left. With all of that in mind, right now I do project that Pennsylvania and Michigan will tilt Democrat, while Wisconsin will tilt right, giving Trump a very narrow electoral college victory with 278 votes to Biden's 260. Obviously, this narrow of an electoral college prediction means I think that the 2024 presidential election is essentially a toss-up at this point. While Biden is historically unpopular and Trump has consistently pulled ahead of him nationally in early polls, incumbent presidents often poll at their worst at this point, before rebounding in polls in the months leading up to their re-election. I made a separate video on this phenomenon, which you can check out by clicking the link that will pop up in the top right-hand corner. I also think it's fair to say that Donald Trump is also a broadly unpopular candidate as well, and so as voters make their final decisions closer to Election Day, they'll be faced with the unique situation of evaluating a Biden presidency against a Trump presidency, as he was most recently president before Biden, rather than simply a Biden presidency against a fresh, new Republican face. We simply can't know for sure whether Biden's poor polling numbers right now are because people are dissatisfied with his candidacy, not necessarily that they would vote for Trump over him this time around, or whether they have actually been turned off enough by him to switch their vote in favor of Trump just 4 years after these two candidates met for the first time. Anyways, that does it for this 2024 presidential election map prediction and analysis. Let me know whether you agree or disagree with these ratings in the comments below. Shout out to my channel members on screen here. Thank you so much for your support. If you would like to become a member, go ahead and click the join button below this video to receive exclusive perks. Also, make sure to join the EPO Discord channel, the link is in the description, to interact with other members of this community. Finally, be sure to check out electionpredictionsofficial.com for my latest 2024 presidential election forecast. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.